Smart tech. Now let's stop recording. I won't start that thing yet because I can write on the screen. I hope I can write on the screen. This is the south of England, okay? And I shall be slowly moving through and changing the format of this. This is the annotated edition, changing the format of this so that you can see what's happening here. That's Andover. I hope I'm going to have time to do that. We listened to Oxford last week, okay? And Norfolk. I hope you're giving yourself time to go through those and think about them. If you've got this edition, which you all have, then look at every word and try and work out which variable I'm talking about. Okay. You probably won't be able to see which variable I'm talking, yeah, okay, some of these I haven't taught. If you can't find it, then just leave it out and maybe send it to me or to bring it up in class. If there are variables you don't understand what's happening here, then send them to me. Let's look at this one. Do you remember Norfolk last week? I won't play that again because I want to go on to London first. But there's things like, if you listen to the way he's saying it, he says, there's boys at my school. There's boys at our school who ain't heard anything like that. And it's the square. It's the square. Set. Air. Isn't it? There. And if you remember, this is not something we learned at this class here. This is something which comes from Phonetics 1 in the first year. If you remember, the air vowel, and I think I'll do this. Okay, the air vowel, and I'm talking about the centering vowels. Do you remember air moving to schwa? And ear moving to schwa, that one and this one, and that's the square vowel, and the near vowel. These are problematic for Icelanders anyway, ear and air, because many Icelanders don't make a distinction in pronunciation there. You've got to listen very clearly. Start I and start e, near and square. Remember, they're only the non-rhotic vowels. It's not American, because in American you'd have near and square, like that. Air. Okay. So the near and square vowel, Icelanders tend to merge them in one, and not to know when you have a word with near or square in it whether it's near or square. So have your finger in the dictionary and make sure you know which one you're talking about. Okay? And many foreigners make this distinction because the two vowels are quite close together. But in modern English, the air vowel, which we still write like this as a phoneme, is often pronounced, and I put it in square brackets to show I'm talking about the actual pronunciation, is often pronounced as a long air. And that is what you'll hear when Matthew teaches you. He says not square, but square. And I think he also does it with near. He says, I'm not sure about that. This is very common in England, and these both are very common in England and Australia, to say square and near. Be near you. I like being near you. It's a square hole. Okay, it's over there, it's over here. Makes a long, and the schwa then drops out. And I'm not sure there's a name for this. We could call it square or near monophthongalization, if you like. Let's call it like that. Let's call it square monophthongal. Well, Wells would call it something more like monophongaling. So if we use a sort of Wells type of speech, we'll call it monophongaling. Okay? There you go. Square monophongaling or square monophongalization would be probably ordinary English.
And could it be something like dress, dress, schwa, split or something?
I see what you mean. You're asking no, because don't think of the square diphthong, this diphthong here. Don't ever think of it as being dress plus schwa. It's not. It's square. It's all by itself. It just happens to be one sound which we write with two symbols. Okay? That's what you must remember. Just like fleece is one sound which we write with all these four things there. I. Okay? It's just one sound which we write with two symbols. It's one phoneme, not a sound, it's one phoneme. On the other hand, the phonemes are split into two. Morai, the word is mora. The diphthongs are split into two morai, and we can, so when we put it on the chart to see how we are here on the chart, when we see how we are pronouncing it, then we can say this is the first mora and that is the second mora. It starts at an air position and it moves into a schwa position. It centers to a schwa position. That's why they're called the centering diphthongs.
What's the mora?
What's the
Mora?
Mora is it's the word we use for a part of a diphthong. This is the first mora of the square diphthong. That's the second mora of the square diphthong. It's a Latin word which means something, or it's a Greek word which means something else. Okay, check it out. Check out what it comes from. Mora. It's also used it's used in syllables as well. The beginning of a syllable and the end of a syllable. But I have always used it to mean different parts of a diphthong. What's happening here then with there's boys at our school? What's happening there with there's boys at our school is simply that he's got a diphthong, a monophthong there. He says there's boys at our school. There's boys at our school. Okay. But could you also notice the dialectal, not the accentual, the dialectal change there? What actually is wrong with that grammatically? There are boys at our school. Okay. So that, you could say, is a dialectal change. There is boys at our school. Except that if you listen to me, I often say it, and many other RP speakers often say there's 2 or 3 people outside. You often hear people say that. So it's not uncommon, but it is supposed to be wrong. Okay.
But it's people say that for like few, as you said, few people. But if it's like 50, they won't say there's 50 people. Yeah.
How many people are outside? Oh, there's 1,000 people. There's 53 people outside. Is this 50? Yeah, I think you would say that, but it's not right. It's spoken language. Okay. And again, I'm being prescriptive there.
You would say are if you want to emphasize that there are.
Yeah, exactly. If you were stressing that, how many are there? And you do it if you're asking, are there 53 people? Yes, there are. Yeah. Although this guy might have said, is there 50 people? Yes, there is.
Yeah, okay.
That's because he's a dialect, you see. It just depends on how much you're thinking of your language there. Anybody, if you remember, what he does there is instead of having the vowel O in body, he has a bit of an unrounded vowel, a bit American, ba, and it's long. Anybody. There isn't anybody, he says. If you listen to that, he makes it long. Anybody. There are places in Britain, in England, in the south of England, particularly the southwest, and in Ireland, where this lot unrounding, which is an American thing, unrounding, that's, so this is the rounded vowel, that's the unrounded vowel, ah is the unrounded vowel at the same place, isn't it? Here you've got O here, ah here, and O here. Okay. It's the unrounded vowel in the same place. And in southwest of England, which we might listen to sometime later, you'll hear that the vowels are also very American. A southwestern speaker would say anybody. Anybody, there's nobody there. And it sounds a bit like American. Anybody there. Both the R and the unrounding of the O. Let's go on just to Cockney now. Let's go on to Cockney and listen to this. Have you listened to to this rather nice, it's a fairly old Cockney accent that we have here. Listen to him first.
In Poplar. My dad came from Wapping and my mum came from Poplar. My dad was one of 11 kids. And Wapping in them days really was one of the poorest parts of London. I mean, they really didn't have shoes on their feet. I'm talking about 70 years ago now. And Poplar...
Let's take that from the beginning again. That's enough to begin with. Lots of things happening here. This is a very, very sort of old-fashioned London accent, but you'll still hear it if you go to London and you buy things from people on the streets, for instance, on stalls on the streets, vegetables. You'll still hear them talking very, very much like that. It's a rather nice Cockney accent. Okay. Notice the things that are happening also dialectally. He says, in them days, not in those days. That's very, very common. And he's got a different weak form of, he's got a weak form of my, which I don't have. He doesn't say my father. He says me dad, me father, me mother. Okay, that's very, very common in the south, and particularly in London. And I think you'll find that people from my area in the south of England may sort of fall into that habit when they're being very informal or joking. Particularly if they're being sort of joking, they put on a sort of London accent, they do things like saying, that's me. My mother doesn't say that. My mother doesn't believe in that. But you often hear that anyway. But it's a weak form of my, okay? Now, first of all, you know that it's not rhotic because it's London, but where would you look for that? Poplar. And listen to Poplar now.
In Poplar. My dad...
Listen to it again.
In Poplar. My dad came from Wapping.
Okay. In Poplar. In Poplar.
Where's Poplar?
Poplar is a part of London. An inner part of London. Okay. Take the other one, take the next one, and say, okay. What would the RP pronunciation of Poplar be? I'm saying pa, it should be po. What would the... It would be a schwa. It would be a schwa. Poplar. Poplar. Okay? That would be the ordinary pronunciation. Now don't you, if you listen to him, he has more of an ah sound there, doesn't he? He says poplar. Ah, ah. This is one of the big traditional London things, that is schwa. At the end of a word, moves down in this direction. And here you've got ah, and here you've got ah. It's sort of, it's a very open, we say it's a very open And if you wanted to write that, you could write schwa with a lowering symbol beneath it, and the lowering symbol is like this, moves it down. It moves it down. If you wanted to move it up, you'd write it like this. That moves it up in the vowel chart. Okay? It's one of the ways of saying you want to rise on you, and there are other ways of showing how to move forward and how to move back. You should look at the IPA chart in order to see how that's done. I think what we do in the IPA chart, if we were moving in this direction, forward, then we write it like this. And if it's moving back, then we write it like this. This may be an old way of doing it, but I think that's the way it's done in the IPA chart.
And which one? Is it the first one on the left for this pronunciation, which is correct?
This one here.
Yeah.
That's the one that's happening here. It's moving down. You can see we put the line underneath to say it's moving down the line. Okay? So that when he says poplar, it's not because, and many people have thought this before when I've gone over this text, it's because it's written A-R, A-R. People think that it's because it's written like that, like a word like beggar, which is A-R. Okay? But poplar, beggar, doctor, teacher are all schwa in RP, and they're all moved down in London to beggar, teacher, Peter, poplar. You'll hear that a lot. So the schwa does tend, at the end of words, it tends to move down to an a sound. Me dad.
Small.
Did he say my dad?
I heard moi.
My dad. Okay, so he's being formal there. My dad, not me dad. My dad came from Wapping. Came, so moi and came. What's happening there? What's it called? Diphthong
For which one?
shift. It's diphthong shift, and you could call that then what type of diphthong shift would my be? What's the vowel in my? What's the name? Do you remember the name of the set? It's a price vowel. Price vowel. So we call that price shift. Okay. Diphthong shift, that is to say price shift. Came instead of came. What's the vowel in came? A face. So that's face shift. Came. My dad came from Wapping. Wapping. The it's called the. We call it the. Trying to wipe that up with my finger. The ing variable. This is known as the ing variable, and that's on my variable sheet. That also occurs in Britain, at least on names, Wapping, Huntingdon, and so on. It also occurs in names of places, but it does not occur in single words like spring, sing. Okay, then you'd never have an in variable there. It's only when it is an ending. And Wapping is like an ending, like running and jumping. Running and jumping. Okay.
How do you write it then?
You just write it E-N. And it's never tensed. It's never tensed to E. This is an Icelandic thing. Icelandic E-N-G, syngja, it turns to E in Icelandic. Doesn't in English. It's E. So it would be, if it's the normal, it would be ing, Wapping, but with the ing variable, it'd be Wapping. Interesting thing about the ing variable which we should perhaps look at. I wonder if there's a way of taking this all out. Is the ing variable a dropping of the G or not?
No, because there's
You'd think it would be, which would you think would be the original? ING or IM? Which is the original, the older form?
The ing.
You'd think so, wouldn't you? And I thought so as well. But if we go back to Old English, the ing form, for instance, drinkan and he was drinking is he was drinkande. The old form in Middle English is and or ind, and it seems to be this is the form which has survived. Drinking is just as possible that it comes from drinkind as that it comes from drinking. The ing form is another form which I think comes in from Norse. At least it's in Norse. The ing ending in Icelandic, thinking, did I miss? It is there in Norse. It's also there in Old English. But the point is that we don't really know, or I don't know, and I can't really tell you, and I've not found it in any books, whether the ing ending today comes from ind or ing. It may be a mixture of the two. Ing was probably more of a gerund, a noun verb, than ing, which was the past participle, ind, which was the past participle. So that it could very, very well be that it's more ancient to say drinking than it is to say drinking, and that this G is a later prescriptive addition. We thought. I wonder if you went through this with Thorhallur in the history of the English language. Did you go through the prescription of the 18th century prescription? You did, didn't you? Where people started putting rules on language, and many of the rules that were put on English language were completely wrong, without any real reason at all. It was like writing the word debt, for instance, or doubt, writing it with a B here. Why did that B come in? It's not there in French, doute, and it was doubt in Middle English, and Shakespeare wrote it like that, doubt. And then suddenly scholars in the 18th century around that time, so-called scholars, started thinking, well, it comes from the Latin word debit, so the B should be there, so we'll put it back. Okay. That sort of thing happened a lot in English. All the rules for apostrophe S occurred at that time. All these rules we have to learn today, whether it's apostrophe S or S apostrophe or not an S apostrophe. All those rules are complete. They have no real sense in history. They're just invented rules. And that's just to make you feel good about having to learn all about whether it's an apostrophe S or not. The boy's hat and the boys' hats. These are completely invented rules which didn't exist in the language before. Which is one of the reasons that when I write private letters, I never use apostrophes in genitive. I just say the boys' hats and put the S in there. It's not there in Icelandic. Dringsin, drinks, hattur. It's not there in Icelandic, and it shouldn't be there in English. But it is there in English because of these idiots in the 18th century. And ing is one of the things that happened in the 18th century, putting the G in because they thought it should be there, because they've seen it in old writing. And what often happens to writing is that it becomes later part of the language because people sort of think writing is more correct than language. Spelling pronunciation comes in. And spelling pronunciation has had a big effect on English. That may be where ing comes from originally, that it was in the old days. Spelling, pronunciation, and since I'm on it, think of words like think of these words. How do you say this first one? Most people say waistcoat in England today. My grandfather said waistcoat. But the spelling pronunciation is coming in and taking over when people are saying waistcoat. What about housewife? Everybody says housewife. But my grandfather said husif. And we still use the word husif today to mean a package of sewing and needles which men used to take with them to war to stop their to do their shirt buttons and put their, you know, a sort of package of repair.
This package is
which you can still buy if you're going walking in the mountains, for instance. Okay, a package of needles and cotton and so on, just to do the repairs.
Ask for a huzif.
And that's still called a huzif.
You could ask for that in the store.
Well, you could when I was in England 40 years ago. I doubt if you could do it now.
But, you know, would they write that differently then? Would they write
I've seen waistcoat written like this. Waistcoat. That's the coat underneath. You know, the short coat underneath. Huzif. I've not seen that. No, I've not seen that. This word. How do you say that?
Covered.
Yeah, and because it's such a common word, people still say cupboard with or without the R. But I wonder if people will not say one time, start talking about a cupboard. Okay, it's like the present tense of woman is what's the sorry, not present tense. The plural of woman is women. Okay, the plural of woman in many European types of English and in most of Indian English is woman. One woman, two women. That's normal Indian English, and that's a spelling pronunciation.
Having E and
Uh,
Because you said singular, you said woman, and plural you said woman.
Yeah, women. And sometimes they get it mixed up because they have a weak form. But Indians don't have so many weak forms. They may say woman and woman, woman and women. Yeah. I really am diversing it. This is great fun. It comes from the word weefman, of course, which is weef is a wife. And that's the original meaning of the word. And the E has changed to O because of the influence of the W in front of it. W. It changed to U fist, woman. Now, it is still U today, isn't it? It's W. Woman, that's right. And why it didn't change in the plural, I'm not sure. But that's the original E in the plural. Okay. Going through this in Poplar. My dad came from Wapping, and my mum came from Poplar. My dad was one of 11 kids, and Wapping in them days really was one of the poorest parts of London.
In Poplar, my dad came from Wapping, and my mum came from Poplar. My dad was one of 11 kids. And Wapping in them days really was one of the poorest parts of London. I mean, they really didn't have shoes on their feet. I'm talking about...
They didn't have shoes on their
Feet.
feet. Feet.
Feet.
What's that?
Mobilization.
Diphthongalization, okay, you can call it, but it's part of the shift. It's part of the diphthong shift, really, because it's fleece shift. Fleece, if you think modern fleece is really a diphthong, it's E. E. Think of the difference between Icelandic E, Iceland, and English fleece. It's a slight E. It's a slight diphthong. Okay? It's doing...
Also, globalization. Globalization. Feet.
Dif-
Stops it.
Foot.
Throat. Instead of saying feet.
Yeah, at the T at the end. Yeah, that's right. Good, good, good. It's also feet. Feet. It's also...
So there is no. Okay.
So he would say something like, this is how you write glottalization. Feet. Feet. I think I would say, I would probably often leave the T, glottalize the T at the end there, and say something like feet. Feet. I, feet. But it's very short, because this is still a fortis consonant, and it still shortens the vowel in front of it. Feet. But remember here, remember to be clear on this, when you're writing it if you do that, if you're writing it like that, then you're showing it in the actual pronunciation, you're putting square brackets around it. Square brackets around it, which is quite different from when you're writing the phonemes. In both cases here, both RP and London, the phonemes are still like that. It's still, the man is still thinking f, e, t, but his pronunciation of e is e, and his pronunciation of t is a. Okay? He may not be aware that he's making that change. Feet.
That's the fleece shift.
The fleece shift. It's a fleece shift. It's moving from E down to E, and it come back in 200 years' time, it'll be I. Fleiss. And all the others that have moved right out of the, well, it'll be fantastic. I'd love to come back in 200 years' time and hear what English is like in London. We won't understand a word. Not a word. Fantastic. Because these movements are actually still going on. They're still becoming quite strong. My dad was one of 11 kids. Kids, I think, is a normal English phrase for children. You find it in RP as well, in standard English. It's not a written, you wouldn't write it. Wapping in them days really was one of the poorest parts of London. I mean. He doesn't have a very short E there, but he's actually saying mean. They really didn't have shoes on their feet. Now, listen to there. Listen to there. See what you can make of it.
In Poplar, my mum came from Poplar. My dad was one of 11 kids. And Wapping in them days really was one of the poorest parts of London. I mean, they really didn't have shoes on their feet. Shoes on their feet. I'm talking about shoes on their feet. I'm talking about shoes on their feet.
Okay. What I'm listening to there is the first consonant in there. On their feet. Now, where does he use? We'll hear it later. We'll hear it later.
You mean there's no...
The. We'll hear it later when it comes up, but we've called it, you remember, we've called it, and I mentioned this before, and we've called it TH fronting, and it's Cockney originally, and it's spreading out to estuary English, the new norm in the south. And it goes like this. th becomes f, which means that the becomes v. Okay, so I think instead of I think, and mother, mava, remember this is sort of lowered, mother, for mother. But it doesn't happen, this, the here, doesn't happen at the beginning of words. Can you remember what words in English, in RP English, have the at the beginning?
The
demonstratives, they're all weak words. All weak words. There are no lexical words with the in it. Grammatical, that's right, the grammatical weak forms, the grammatical forms, the demonstrative pronouns, the, this, that, those, them, all these little words. They're the only words in English, there is another one, the only words in English which have the at the beginning of the word. Except in the southwest of England, where everybody has there at the beginning. They say, I think what you think. Okay. Coates comes up from Somerset, where the cider apples grow. It's all voiced at the beginning of the word. But in London, so what happens at the beginning of words with words like that and the and all these other words? Weird things happen in London. Firstly, you might get just the normal the. People say those days, them days. And I think he does it when he's stressing it, them days. Okay. But you get all kinds of other vowels. You get n, you get l. Depends on what vowel and what consonant comes in front of it. And here, I think you'll find that he says, really didn't have shoes on their feet, and it's almost as if he's saying, air. Being a Londoner, he has the square vowel very clear, air. He doesn't say air, although you'll hear it a lot in London now. He's an old-fashioned Londoner. This is probably taken up. This is probably recorded in the 1960s.
Is it N and
N on their feet.
and then
Supposed to be
square?
schwa and a, right?
The other way.
I'm sorry. Yes, of course.
Okay.
Yes.
But this wouldn't happen if this word was stressed.
No, I think if he was stressing it over there, then he'd say the. And the funny thing about th fronting, both the and th in London, is that it's variable. It seems that a normal Londoner will know that it should be the and th, and often use the and th. It's a formality variable. If you're talking formally, when he starts, you notice he says in them days, or he's stressing them there, and he has the, and he will say either mother or mother. He'll say both. Mother will be the informal way of saying it. Mother is the formal way of saying it. There's some really queer things happening with. I'm going well over time. Let me just finish what this sentence is. What I'm saying in this sentence. Really queer things happening both with th fronting in London. It's variable. It's optional. It's used to show identity, to show I am a Londoner. And Londoners love being Londoners. They love talking very Londony, you know, to make sure they're Londoners. The other one is H dropping in London. That seems to be optional. It does seem there are indications that many Londoners know where the H is and they know they're dropping it out.
They wouldn't put the H back in ancient.
So they wouldn't do that. But I have heard Londoners also do that. It's dependent there. It's rather dependent there on very many factors. I've heard Londoners say Henry and Arthur. But that seems to be more sort of out in the country. Ancient Henry Arthur seems to be more out in the country.
So if it was on instead of on in this instance,
Where is this? Shoes.
on their feet.
No, he's got a lot there, but he's stressing on.
So if it was all their feet, it would be all their feet. You
Oh.
would put an L instead of an N, right? In there.
Oh, I see what you mean. On their feet. All their feet. Yeah, that's right. If it was all their feet, you'd have an L there, something like that. All their feet. It just lengthens the L in front of it, lengthens the N in front of it. And if there's a consonant, if there's a vowel in front of it, see, can you see our feet? You can even leave it out, just have nothing there. You have zero there. Can you see our feet? That's right. So, but you would also very often have this there. Just listen to that when you hear it. You'll find, I think it comes up later.
So, about the H dropping in this part of Finland, it's like they're doing hypercorrection or they're not.
You'll hear both hypercorrection and you'll hear not hypercorrection. You'll hear, I mean, a lot of educated Cockneys know exactly how to spell, and they know where the H should be or not. But there are other Cockneys, and particularly outside in the estuary area. No, not in the estuary area. Funny about estuary English, it doesn't have H dropping. Estuary English doesn't have H dropping. They put the H in, they know where the H is. That's queer. Not so much anyway. The recordings I've heard, people have it. Like people, if you listen to, I had a student who did a BA essay on David Beckham, how David Beckham speaks, and she recorded a lot of his interviews and did a really good essay on his speech. And he always pronounces the H perfectly like an RP person, although he's got very strong estuary English. A lot of estuary things going on. I think you'll find this guy will use glottalization. No, he'll use glottaling everywhere. Now, Wells makes this distinction, and I think we ought to make it. Okay, let's go on with this then. Let's go on with the listening to it and see what happens now. If we can go on from here. And we're down to something like, I'm talking about 70 years ago now. People didn't have shoes on their feet in London 70 years ago. So he's speaking in the 1950s or 60s, something like that. He's talking about his father in 1880, 1890. He's talking about the beginning of the century before that. People were barefoot in London.
I'm talking about 70 years ago now.
Nah. Talking about 70 years ago, nah. The mouth vowel is not mouth shifted like it was in what we listened to last time, when people were saying no and about. In London, you get this vowel, sort of long or a tiny at the end, na, or even it might be a sort of vowel. A bat. It's a bat. We don't do it na.
And how is it in GA? How is it in GA? In General American?
General American, that would be a General American is just ow, now. Or a bit more now, roughly more now, yeah. But it's a clear ow sound, okay, ow sound. London, nah. Come down my ass. Come down to my house. Okay.
You call it mouth shift.
We can call it mouth shift. It's a particular type of London mouth shift. Very strong London Cockney mouth shift, yeah. Talking about 70 years ago now, and Poplar was slightly, just slight cut above
And poplar was just slightly a cut above Wapping. You was either...
A cut above.
So,
Beautiful. Cut above. A cut above, it's sort of London dialect. It just means a little bit, you know, we often talk about it in terms of social status. He's a cut above us. A cut above us. Just a little bit above us, he's higher scale. Okay. So poplar was a cut above Wapping. People in poplar were thought of as being a little bit posher than the people in Wapping. Okay. That's true, I remember that. Poplar, yeah. They all had the same accent, but you thought of them, they had bigger houses, slightly more money in Poplar than they were in Wapping. And if you went on down, if you went down to East Ham, for instance, and my grandmother came from East Ham, that was really low class. My grandma had a Scottish accent, though. She'd come down from Scotland. And Poplar was just slightly a cut above Wapping. Now, here you get, listen to the vowel in this word here. Gosh, I'm making a line across it. Okay, wow, I'm making a line across it. Take that up. This word here, how do we say it in RP? Let me hear you. Or either. Either seems to be sort of more upper class RP. Either. I think I learnt to say either. Don't think I say either. Remember my father being annoyed with me when I came home from school and saying either. He said, don't talk like that. We're a cut above that, Peter. Say either. I said, okay, Dad, either. All right? Either is more, although it's accepted everywhere now. It's American. It's the American pronunciation. Okay? But in London it was always there. And, but listen to him.
East End respectable, or you were sort of, you was either East End respectable, or you were sort of, you was either East End respectable, or you was either East End respectable, or
Either. You was either East End. Why is the R there in the end? Why doesn't he say Eva? Why does it either?
because there's
East. Vowel follows. Either East End. You was either East End, and was, not were. You was either East End respectable, or you was sort of East End villain, you know.
Sorry, I didn't get the thing about cut above.
About what?
Cut above Wapping.
What it means, a cut above, it means a one social step above.
Yeah.
They're slightly higher, slightly more respectable people, slightly more better citizens, more bourgeois, as we would say. You was either East End respectable, that's Poplar, the East End, or you was sort of East End villain, and that would be East Ham. That would be Wapping. Down by the river. If you're down by the river, then you're sort of more villain. You know. And my family was respectable on both sides, he says. I think he says both. Let's see if he says both sides.
respectable, or you were sort of East End villain, you know, and my family was respectable on both sides.
I don't know whether he says or not, but it's definitely I sides. Okay.
Some more of the same speaker now. The phrase "me father had," meaning my father had, illustrates linking R before a dropped H. And we notice again the TH fronting in father with a V sound in the middle. Compare Thursday, which comes later on, which is said with a dental fricative, showing inconsistency here. Dropped H again in the phrase go home. And then lastly, in the word house, we have a nice example of the broad Cockney version of this diphthong when it's really more or less a monophthong, a front open monophthong, ass.
Ass.
But my father had a very tough time because his father died when he was 19, leaving him the only one working to bring up 10 brothers and sisters. And on a Thursday night, he'd sometimes go home and the youngest two would be crying in 10 brothers and sisters. 10 brothers and sisters.
Do you hear the there, brothers, 10 brothers and sisters? And notice H being dropped out everywhere. It might be dropped out here in RP. It wouldn't be dropped out in home, go home, and the youngest two would be crying in a corner, in a corner. The only difference between that and in a corner is that you've got a longer N. It would be in corner, in a corner, whereas in a corner would be just in a corner. Okay. Possibly the change there is where the syllable begins. Here it will begin here, n, and here it will be. No. Spool back. I didn't say that. Yeah.
Can you write it in one word?
Yeah, good question. Can you write it in one word? My answer to that is always, when you are writing phonetic script, the spaces have no meaning. So you can put them in and leave them out as you like, just to make it easier to read. If you put a space in, it has no meaning, if you can remember that. But if you're not putting any spaces in, it's very difficult to read. So it's worthwhile just putting the spaces in to show where the words are. But there aren't any spaces, of course, in speech, are there? Do you know when people started putting spaces in between words? In written language? It was well into the 10th, 11th century. What you get first is that people in Latin and all languages began to put spaces in between phrases. Put a space where there was a comma, for instance. Sentence like in the house would always be in tham huset, as it would be in Old English, would probably be written in one, in tham huset, and then perhaps a space after that. Okay, and then later, I think it was the French probably who began first to put in, the Carolingians who began to put in spaces into words, and it spread out because it's so much more easy, and you can see where the words are so much more easy to read. What does the word read mean? It originally means Icelandic ráða, to interpret, to work out. Lesa, the German lesen, is the same as the Icelandic word að lesa, to gather together. Lesa ull, for instance, to gather together. That's another way. It means interpreting, gathering the things together. And in the old days, people would read texts aloud and slowly because they had to work out what they meant, because there were no spaces in the words. And people would actually be ráða textan. They were reading the text. That's what read means. It means to think about and to work out. Originally. And it is, you should try it. You should take a text in your computer and do a global change, take out all the spaces, so all the words are written together, then try and read it aloud. And you find the only way of reading it aloud is by really getting into the text and thinking, what does it mean? And reading it slowly. It's very, very good. There's a text that is very difficult to understand. You should do it like that, and you really have to work out what it means. Okay, Goldman, the youngest two will be crying. What's the matter with them? What's the matter with them? With them? Now, what I was going to do is to look at in the corner. Yeah, we've done that. What's the matter with them? What's the matter with them? Now, I remember what I was going to write. Matter. I was going to write this. Make a distinction between make a distinction between make a distinction as Wells does between glottalization and glottaling. This is Roach's word, he's made it up. It's not English, but we can use it. Glottalization now is adding a glottal stop, which is common in RP and in the southern accents, and also in London accents. So, for instance, instead of saying what's this word?
Mattress.
Yeah, what you sleep on, a mattress. Okay. Let's take matchbox. Okay. Typically, when you get a t or a ch with another consonant following it, then you get glottalization. We talked about this in the first term. You add a glottal here and say mattress, mattress, matchbox. It's very difficult to hear, and not everybody does it. It's very short. You might do it, for instance, if you're talking slowly in words like, what's the matter? No, you wouldn't do it in matter. You wouldn't do it in matter. That's glottalization, adding the glottal stop in front of the fortis consonant. Glottaling is after you've added the glottal stop, you drop the consonant off. It's just churning the consonant into a glottal stop. So that in clear speech, I might say, well, I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that. And I'm actually going that, although it's very, 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 very little. And we don't know how old that is in the language because it's not been noticed before, it's never in the writing. I don't agree with that, instead of I don't agree with that, do you see? But a Cockney then would go on and change, take out the T, so that you just get that. And so would I, because it's very common in words like that at the big end of a word. I don't agree with that. That's not what I agree with. That's very, very common. Glottaling then is when T becomes a glottal stop. All right? That's glottaling. And in London particularly, it's even better than that, because you will hear it in some London accents and even some types in some London speakers, and even in some types of estuary speakers, you'll hear it instead of k in words like making, or p in words like supper. You might even hear making and supper. Supper. It's not very common, but you might hear it. So all the fortis plosives between vowels, and at the end of a word may turn into a glottal stop. But t does it most and almost always. What, Peter, bottle, and so on. And they literally didn't have any food in the house. You might listen to the vowel of food, and you might listen to the th of the house. It's n, probably.
On a Thursday night, he'd sometimes go home and the youngest two would be crying in a corner, and he'd say, "What's the matter with them, Ma?" "Oh, well, Harry, you know, it's Thursday night and you don't get paid till tomorrow." And they literally didn't have any food in the house.
Didn't have any food in the house. In the house. In the house. Didn't have any food in the house. Do you notice that? Do you notice there that? Let's look at it. Do you notice then that in the house, in the office, how would this change in RP? In the house, but in the office. Okay, clear on that? And in a lot of general American accents as well. Although you will hear Southern American accents which don't do that. They say in the house and in the office. Now, when he drops the H off ass, that changes to E as well. So what he's actually saying is in a little bit tensed. Okay. In. You can say something like that. Didn't have any food in the ass. In the ass. In the ass. Didn't have any food in the ass.
But my father had a very tough. He'd say, "What's the matter with them, Ma?" "Oh, well, Harry, you know, it's Thursday night and you don't get paid till tomorrow." And they literally didn't have any food in the house.
Another thing there is he says he uses f for think and so on, but he has th on Thursday. I think he says Thursday the first time and Thursday the second time. I'm not sure about that. You might listen to it.
Who would be crying in a corner, and he'd say, "What's the matter with them, Ma?" "Oh, well, Harry, you know, it's Thursday night and you don't get paid till tomorrow." And they literally didn't have any food in the house.
Yeah, Thursday night. Sounds like Iceland now, doesn't it? You know, it's getting like that in Iceland again. We'll all be walking around barefoot very soon. Great fun. And one other thing that I wanted, before we leave that, I wanted to point out to you, because it's rather interesting. I've lost it. Okay, food in the ass. Didn't have any food in the ass. Now, how would this H here, this have? How would that be? How would that be in? How would this be in RP? Didn't have any food in the house. How would it be in RP? Let's try it. What am I doing? Here, I want this. I want this.
It's an auxiliary, so would you put the...
Would it be a... Didn't have any food in the house? Do you want to make any changes?
Yeah, the H.
No. I'm being nasty to you here. No, you don't want to make any changes. Where's the stress is? Didn't, because that's a negative. Have, because it's the main verb. To have something. They didn't have any food. Any food in the house. So it would be an H in English, in RP. And that's the thing we always forget. You can drop it. Didn't have any, yeah. But we have got no food in the house. We have got, because it's have got. We have forgotten, that would be dropped out. So that if you've got I think you can say always that if you've got a strong vowel and a stress on have, then you're going to have the ha there as well. But of course he leaves it up. Didn't have any food in the house. Okay. All right. Now we have 1 minute more of this horrible long class, although I started late, so we're okay. What I want to give you just briefly, and I won't probably go through it, is the question of the adoptive RP. We'll listen to what Wells says. This is the last text in the South. We'll listen to what Wells says here.
Now number 6, RP Revisited. What we've got in the next excerpt is what seems to be adoptive RP. That is the speech of someone who is very speech conscious, very careful with her speech. And she has certain characteristics that you don't actually find in those who've spoken RP all their lives. For example, she carefully says where and what and which, with no glide cluster reduction, usual RP pronunciations where, what, which. And in the words field and people, you hear the very clear L that she uses, again distinct from the usual RP form, field and people.
And we'll listen to her.
Well, the oils, of course, come from all over the world, from various aromatic plants, but the actual centre where most of them are collected, or indeed actually some of the aromatic plants are themselves grown, is in Grasse in France, and that is actually the centre for the what we call the pure essential oil trade. Although I have been trained in the medical field, I make it quite clear that in my work here it is actually beauty treatment. But of course, minor stress ailments such as migraine can be helped merely by giving massage with oils which are very relaxing and detensifying, so that one isn't really working into the realms of real medicine. One is just merely helping people who are tired and fatigued and a little bit stressed.
Yeah, people. It's very difficult to hear. One of the things she might also be doing is not using so many weak forms. What happens a lot, or what I think it's not so important now, what used to happen a lot when I was a kid in England, and I have a cousin who we were brought up together, she's like my sister, exactly the same age, and she became an actress, and she wasn't a very good actress, so she taught what we often call, what does she call it? Enunciation, I think, good pronunciation. And a lot of people who came to her had London accents or regional accents. They wanted to speak posh, so they learnt how to speak an RP accent like she had it. She still has a stronger RP accent than I had. Okay, and she lived all her life teaching people how to speak. It's quite a trade in England, actually. Probably not so much today because people don't care so much how they speak, but in those days. But of course, she's not a phonetician, and she would teach people that it's better to say people than to say people. And it's better to say, another thing that happens is, that's the way this horrible phrase, give it, don't listen to I, listen to her, listen to she. Have you heard that? Don't listen to I, listen to she, because somehow I suppose is supposed to be more better language than me, and she is supposed to be better than her, and you often get people not using her or him or me when they're being very formal. They say to I, to he.
That's crazy.
Well, it's crazy to Icelanders who don't do it because they have this system in their minds, much clearer. It happens not only in those. I think it's because I was taught in school that I shouldn't say, if somebody asks me who's there, I shouldn't say it's me, which is normal English. It's me. Like normal French, c'est moi. You don't say c'est je. You couldn't do it in French.
No, you couldn't.
No, you couldn't do it. But in English, we took that from the French. We say, it's me. Me is the strong isolated form of I. But I was told in the school that's wrong. You can't say it's me. You have to say it's I. Nobody ever said it's I since Shakespeare died. But it's the sort of thing that you have to say. And I think it's a sort of, as soon as you start becoming prescriptive and say how people should speak, then they get all worried about it and start doing the wrong things. Notice that as soon as you start telling people that they shouldn't say mer longer, they should say meg longer. As soon as you start saying that, you start getting people saying yer longer. And I've heard that because they think it's better. Prescription is a horrible beast. It changes the language, but I mean, it changes the language just like everything else changes the language. We should accept it. On Monday next, then, I'll go through as quickly as we can the northern accents, because then I want to get into Scotland and Wales, where things really start becoming interesting. The northern accents, though, are very interesting. So if you can download the northern accents for next week, print them out, have them with you in class. Okay? Any questions?
Yeah, I do. What's the difference?
Between people and people. What she was saying there. Is that what you want to ask?
Yeah.
Good.
I didn't hear it.
You didn't hear it? No, it's very, very quick. Go back and listen to it again and again and again until you hear it. It's not easy to hear. It's this difference. You remember L? You remember L? It sounds a bit Irish. They do it in Ireland. People. Ah, the people. That's right. They have a light L in English in Ireland. And yeah, Welsh too. We the people of Ireland.
It's funny, I've been living in Ireland, but I don't remember all that.
The rule is, isn't it, that L becomes W when it occurs, when it doesn't occur in front of a vowel.
Okay.
So what we have to say there is U is ordinary light L where it occurs in front of a vowel. Yes. Light L when it occurs in front of a vowel, and dark L elsewhere.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
Yeah.
So if it, so milk, that's right, milk, and so on. But because she has been, one of the reasons is that in London you get L vocalization, which will turn milk into milk. Milk. Whenever L is dark in RP, it tends to turn into a vowel.
So that's what she said.
Yeah, and because she probably says milk in her old accent, then somebody has taught her you must pronounce it clearly, and so she says milk.
Ah, okay, yeah, it's
She says milk, and people instead of people. It's a hypercorrection, if you like.
Yeah.
Okay?